welcome to Corpse Club, the official podcast of Daily Dead. This is one of your co-hosts, Brian Christopher, and we are asking you once again, what's your favorite scary movie? We're returning to Woodsboro to have a revisit for the new Scream 2022 edition. I'm going to be calling it Scream 5 for the rest of the episode because I'm a cantankerous old curmudgeon. We do know that there was we've done a horror BFFs on this with the great Heather Wixon and Patrick Bromley. They covered Scream when it first came out. We're doing a little revisit now that it's come out on VOD. Maybe we can get a little spoilery with it, be a little more fast and loose with some of the plot twists. But like any good Scream installment, I'm not going to be doing this by myself. I will have an accomplice, and that's going to come in the form of Mr. Derek Anderson.
Greetings, Corpse Clubbers and fellow Scream accomplice.
How you doing tonight, Derek?
Doing well. And I'm excited to dive into Scream, slice into it deeper than we have before. I know I talked about it briefly on a previous episode, but now that it's out on VOD, it'll be nice to get into all the gory details.
Yeah, let it breathe and bleed a little bit more, right?
Exactly.
So with that said, we are going to potentially get into, well, not potentially, we're definitely going to get into spoiler territory. We'll try and do some kind of initial discussion where we stay spoiler free. We're definitely going to have a crossover point where we get into all the gory details. So if you have not seen it yet, it is streaming on all the various VOD platforms. Check it out. Come on back. Unless you don't care about it getting spoiled, in which case, just enjoy the ride. Just want to start off. It's been 11 years since Scream 4 came out?
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, because 2011 was Scream 4, which was already like another decade and change after Scream 3. And so now we're kind of at a point where hopefully we don't have to wait 10 years for Scream 6. But
I think with the amount this one made, we probably won't. This is also the first one without the late, great Wes Craven. The partners behind Radio Silence, Matt Bettinelli-Olpin and Tyler Gillette, do you know?
I think it's Gillette, but because I know Gillette has that E at the end, but
gotcha. So we'll say
as much as I want to say he's like, part of the shaving cream company, I'm going to go with Gillette.
We'll say Gillette. Yeah, because we're professionals here.
Right.
Do our homework to find this out beforehand. They're kind of taking the mantle from the great Wes Craven. And of course, it's a requel of sorts, which is the latest way to kind of restart a franchise, something they poke fun at in the movie itself. But, we know that you can't just do a sequel anymore. You can't just reboot it entirely. So, we bring together the best of both worlds, a bit of the old and the new. Just want to start off, Derek, I'd be interested to hear what'd you think?
Overall, really enjoyed it. It was one of those movies where it's kind of, I almost need to see it again just because the first time you see it, you're just processing it and seeing these familiar faces and trying to really figure out the mystery of it all. And it's kind of always a shock factor with Scream because like seeing Scream 4, I remember being super psyched to see it because it had been so long. And then this one, it's like another 10 years and more had gone by. And so I'm still kind of processing it, even though it's been over a month since I saw it, but just overwhelmingly satisfied with it. I don't think it really necessarily reinvented the wheel, but I think they stuck the landing as much as they needed to with it. And they had fun with it too. I think they really nailed that blend of self-aware humor while not sacrificing the horror, which is always a fine line to walk for any Scream movie. But I think they really got to the heart of what a Scream movie is. And, some mileage may vary because there's a lot of similarities to the first movie and maybe a little too much of that at some times, but overall though, very enjoyable. So I enjoyed it.
Yeah. With all these kind of revivals or revisiting old franchises. Kind of really started with Halloween 2018, with really kind of taking these legacy characters and bringing in new folks. And then, of course, we have the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which basically just kind of did the same thing. Um, I see Scream as actually being more in line with Star Wars: The Force Awakens, just
Yes,
in terms of
absolutely.
the way it brought in new characters, but wove in the old legacy characters as well.
Yep.
In actually
Right
some
down
kind
to
of
the
like,
Death Star,
yeah,
the similar Death Star approach to the finale. Like
yeah,
if you're talking about the climax, very similar, but still doing its own thing a little bit.
and just like eerily similar in terms of bringing in, I'm sure some people are really going to disagree with this, but like for me, Dewey is kind of the Han of the Scream series.
Yep.
He's maybe like the more, I don't know, goofy milquetoast version of Han Solo, but he's that guy that kind of stole the show and has been a
Mm-hmm.
fan favorite over the past, well, including this one, the past five installments, and kind of really focusing on him at first, and then pulling in the other characters later. So he's kind of that pivot point between the newer characters who we meet first, and he's kind of your first legacy character that you see. So I can't get into too much more of the similarities till we get into spoiler territory. But yeah, that was one of the things that really kind of kept popping up in my mind, and I would say I say that as a good thing because I quite enjoyed
Mm-hmm.
The Force Awakens. If it makes me a little reticent, it's just because knowing what happened with the rest of the second wave of Star Wars, the Star Wars trilogy. Like I really liked Force Awakens, loved the Last Jedi, and then it just dive bombed with the Return of Skywalker. So with this, I have to imagine that we're probably looking, because I think at this point we're looking at 138 million and change off of a 24 million dollar budget. We're probably going to get at least one more of these. So, I hope they kind of keep going with that upward trajectory instead of kind of backpedaling with if they turn it into like a new trilogy of movies. I hope they don't kind of backpedal that last one and just do a bunch of weird fan service. But I don't think they would. Because I don't think we have to worry about like the Scream fandom. I don't think is as quite toxic as the Star Wars fandom can be.
Yeah, and I think as long as they keep, and it seems like they are going to bring back the same creative team behind the camera. I'm assuming that will also translate to some of the survivors from this movie. So as long as they stay on the same page with where they want it to go over like, I'm assuming, it'll be like a new trilogy. If they do, once the sixth one comes out, I think it's only a matter of time that we'll get another one after that, as long as it performs at the box office. But yeah, I'm hoping that I feel like it's going to, be a very cohesive thing and that everyone's on the same page and that they wouldn't do it unless they felt like it would be a home run for the people involved and the fans, and honoring the legacy of Wes Craven, because there's kind of that added element there where they're like, we can't let Wes down. So I feel like there's a very kind of unified front, thankfully, on this one, where it's like, instead of everyone running in all different directions, like, well, we
Mm-hmm.
want to do this. And, it's like, no, we got to stay on the same path. So I feel good about it, which is good. Even though this movie, I feel like definitely there's some things that could have done differently. I think overall it was exactly kind of what it needed to be. And it really makes you excited for the future as well.
Yeah, yeah. Um, So I guess let's talk a little bit about we know that in terms of the main legacy characters, you're going to get Sydney, you're going to get Gail, you're going to get Dewey. What do you think about the new cast? What do you think about this new kind of slew of potential knife fodder?
I really enjoy the new cast, and I think they made that a priority in the casting of it and the writing of the characters. And I think they did a really good job of spending enough time with them in this movie where you actually feel like they're the main characters, and it's not just like they're there to die so that Sydney and Dewey and Gail can come back. I feel like they really are like important to the story. And of course, in this movie, there's a lot of connections to the past, so they do a good job of interweaving that in as well. But I really enjoy the new cast, and I feel like there's a good chemistry there that is reminiscent of the first movie. And right from that opening scene with Jenna Ortega as Tara, I think she's been someone who's been really well received from her performance in this movie. And she's also going to be in like the new Wednesday Addams series and Ty West's X. And so her career is just taking off in the stratosphere with the horror world. But I do feel like they spent a lot of time with them, and they invested a lot in them, and they just made them more than it would have been really easy for them to just be there to die. And they made a good job of kind of blending that with the returning characters, and then also being self-aware of that too, because it's all part of that requel approach as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they serve a lot of different purposes in terms of making that connection between kind of the original series and kind of where it's going now. Because and we're getting into minor spoiler territory here. A lot of these kids are related to people from the original movie. And so that's kind of the thread that weaves them together, but it also, it makes sense. It's a small town. Obviously, when we're talking about generations of kids in a small town, they're going to have connections to people who were there before. And if it's a town like Woodsboro, where, a lot of people wound up either being serial killers or people being stalked by serial killers, then, that's going to happen. So, I thought that was a good connection, but I also thought it was good that they weren't just like pieces on a chessboard just to kind of move around. I think they did a good job at giving all these kids personality, linking them to kind of their forebearers without making it kind of too obvious personality wise. So like you have, the Meeks twins.
Yes.
And it's funny because you have two of them. You have Mindy and you have Chad. Chad is kind of more of a jock, and he just a big kind of a himbo in kind of a nice way. But Mindy seems to be the one who's really taking on her uncle's kind of obsession with movies. But they also do it in a way where like she's still got that kind of like annoying movie nerd factor, but it's not as over the top as her Uncle Randy's was. So
it's a little more scaled back,
yeah.
A little more accessible, even though I love Randy's enthusiasm.
But yeah, it's nice to know that like they did a good job at kind of seeing the seeds of kind of what was before, but taking it into different places with these characters, and using that to have an updated conversation about kind of the state of horror and horror fandom. Because it comes out,
yeah.
and I think in some ways, they're a little heavy-handed with these conversations with the meta discussion, but I think you could say that was true of the first one, with the, laying out the slasher rules and, kind of being, pretty blunt and straightforward, and also maybe kind of making up their own version of what the slasher rules are. I think you see here, when they kind of talk about the divide between elevated horror and like the classic slasher horror, they're, they're not leaving much room for nuance, but this series has never really been about having like a nuanced discussion about these things. So it's definitely something I think can be forgiven if it's a little heavy-handed.
Yeah, and I think it's something that, we're so into the horror community that it's for kind of a casual fan going into it to kind of hear how they kind of view the toxic fandom and everything. I think it's very accessible, and it kind of makes sense because it also reminded me of Mickey from Scream 2 with how he said, "Oh, I'll just blame it on the movies. Like the violence made me do it." And so it does kind of tie into what Scream traditionally does, at least especially in the first two Scream movies, and then the fourth one as well. And so maybe they do beat you over the head with it a little bit more than they need to, but it is definitely a driving force behind why these killers are doing what they do and why they take the approach that they do with like the whole requel framework of their killings and targeting both new characters and returning characters and exposing kind of all these familial ties in the town and everything. So it definitely kind of lines up with that framework that Kevin Williamson put into place all those years ago. And he, used Randy as that conduit to explain all of these rules.
Exactly. Yeah. Um, and there's more of a conversation with discussing these rules because you have, in Mindy, you kind of have the current expert, but there's a little kind of give and take with Dewey, who, is the first of the legacy characters introduced to this group of kids, who is also like I'm the one who's actually been through all this. It's not theory for me. I've actually lived through this in practice. So these are the things that are really important for you to keep in mind. So it's interesting,
and he's very
to add
blunt
that
about
layer.
that.
Yes, yeah. Or as blunt as Dewey can be. Like, he's always got that. I really love the way David Arquette kind of plays that really awkward, but also like comes through in the end, and clearly knows what he's talking about. Like, he's not stupid. He's just generally socially awkward.
Right. Yep. Yeah. He's always had kind of this nice Midwestern charm about him and politeness. And I feel like over the course of the first four, like Dewey in Scream versus Dewey in Scream 5 is like a very more weathered, but you can still see traces of that character, but he's definitely had an arc over that time as well. But
which is also interesting because with these gaps between, 3 and then 4 and then 4 and then 5, you kind of have to take like just what little bits of nuggets they give you about what happened in the decade that things are so different. And so, they give you just enough to kind of figure out what happened between him and Gail, that he's on his own and back in Woodsboro, while she's, when we meet her in the new installment, she's in New York as a morning show host. So she's kind of living the dream while he's back in Woodsboro, just kind of. It's like it's interesting because they have a conversation about how like he belongs, he just belongs in Woodsboro. But when we meet him, uh, getting back into the orbit of these kids, it doesn't look like he's really been doing a lot for himself. Like he was, he says he was asked politely to retire as the sheriff in the town, and so he's just kind of existing and kind of longing for Gail from afar. So it's kind of weird when they say he belongs in Woodsboro. It's almost like he belongs there as he's almost like the town's Mike from It. Like he's the one who stays there and
yes.
is ready for when this happens again, because it
Yep.
will inevitably happen again. So
And call everybody and let them know, hey, it's time to come back. Well, in his case, don't come back.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I love how they introduce him and how they play with your expectations too about what happens, kind of, especially with that opening and everything, that opening scene. But it is very interesting how he's very much he's kind of the heart of the franchise at this point when we meet up with him, but he's also very beaten down and in a very dark place too. So it's kind of like this new killer kind of pulls him out of that, but it also puts him in more danger than he's been in a long time. So it's very interesting to see that play out, and to see that as much as he tells Sydney and Gail not to come, of course, the first thing that they do is they come as fast as they can.
Yeah. Especially Gail, and it just,
right.
It's a good shorthand way of saying like there's that history there and they still care about one another. It's a movie that shows. I think that's a good thing about this movie is they're good at, the old adage, show don't tell, and I think they do that pretty well here. So I definitely enjoyed that. So I guess one of the things, we'll start to, this is going to start to edge into some of the heavier spoilers. But just to kind of put the focus back on our new kids, because, like we've been talking about, this is a good blend of the newer and the legacy characters, but they do, like, all in all, this is mainly about the new characters, and this is kind of that passing of the torch. And so at the center of it is Melissa Barrera as Sam Carpenter. And she's pulled back after she's pulled back into Woodsboro. She's been gone. You don't learn until probably about a third of the way into the movie why she had left. But her sister is attacked in a way that mirrors, the way Drew Barrymore's character was attacked in the first one. I think the clever twist there is though that the sister doesn't die. So again, we warned you starting into some of the spoilers here.
Even after a very brutal attack too, because they did not pull punches in that scene.
She gets pretty lit up. She gets her side sliced. She gets stabbed multiple times. She gets a compound fracture in her leg. Like it's definitely one of those things where you don't think she's making it out, but she does pull through. And that brings Sam back, and you find out though fairly quickly that the reason she left in the first place was because as a kid she found out that her dad isn't her real dad, and that her father was actually Billy Loomis, the one of the killers from the original, which I think sets up a really interesting kind of conversation in the movie where Sam is regularly having these visions, um, oddly of her father after being stabbed
right
and shot
very
at the end of the original Scream. I think that's an interesting choice, but they're also very clear that these visions are, she's on, antipsychotic or some kind of mental health medication, and the visions are kind of warning her like, oh, would you run out of medicine? And so we're kind of starting to get pushed towards like, are the sins of the past like coming back to haunt them? And of course, there's that question that's been leading up to the release of this one, because there were all those rumors about like, are they going to bring Stu back? Like, did he maybe not actually get killed? And is he behind this? So, and I think ultimately, like a lot of the discussions about these being family members of people from the original movie are one of the red herrings of the movie when you find out what it's ultimately about and the reasons behind the killings. Because you might think it's like, one of the family members of Billy or Stu, kind of bringing about revenge for what happened in the first one, but we'll find out a little bit later. It doesn't really have as much to do with that. But what do you think about the way they played with these kids and their connection to the original movie?
I think it was very clever because it was yet another way that they subverted your expectations. And you can tell the writers and the directors, they know exactly what they're doing. They're very familiar with the entire franchise. I mean, they were fans of it growing up, and now that here they are playing in the sandbox. But I think I think they're trying to stay one step ahead of the audience, but by almost just doing something that you wouldn't expect and almost making it more simple than you would expect too, because in your mind, you're kind of like, well, there's no way they're going to do that because it'd be too similar to this, like from this previous movie. And yet that's what they do, because sometimes that's the most surprising thing of all, is when it's as simple as it seems. So I thought that was a really clever way to play with it, and it makes sense too, because when you come back to Woodsboro, over 25 years have gone by since the events of the first film. So of course you're going to have characters who are younger teenagers and young adults who were related in some way to all of these events from previous films, because so much time has gone by. Now they're becoming adults. And so it all kind of just lines up perfectly in that way. And the Billy Loomis connection with Sam is kind of a bold move. I wasn't really expecting them to go that far with it, especially because it kind of rewrites history, especially with the Billy and Sydney storyline from the first movie. And then, especially with kind of the rule about having sex in that movie and how that's such an important factor of Billy's character in that film. So it really kind of rewrites history in some ways. Which was kind of a little more than I expected, but not necessarily in a bad way. It took some getting used to seeing a de-aged Billy Loomis keep popping up like in the rear view mirror. I'm like, wait, is this a Scream movie? Or are we watching
Yeah,
like a ghost movie?
yeah. Is Skeet Ulrich haunting us all? Like, what's going on? Um, and so, when we talk about these being red herrings, I think now, we've kind of given enough of a runway. I think we can officially say, okay, we're going to get into spoiler territory, because what we find out is that throughout all of this, they're talking about the secret family connections and the past coming back to haunt you, and it turns out that the killers are one of the friends, Amber, played by Mikey Madison, and then Sam's boyfriend, Richie, played by Jack Quaid. And it turns out that they kicked all of this off again because they were unhappy with the last installment of the Stab franchise, which at this point was like Stab 8 or something like that. And they hint at that, that they've kind of been poking some fun, I think, at horror fandom. Like you see like the YouTube clip where they're complaining about Stab 8, and there's like all the obnoxious graphics and stuff like that. And they're kind of letting that be in the background when, and it turns out that plays so much more into the reason behind the killings, because Richie and Amber met on like a Reddit thread where they both realized that, like, they had a lot in common with the way they viewed the way things went, and then how they can make things better, which was they wanted to do a whole new slew of killings to give more source material for a future movie so that they can kind of return back to basics. So it's, again, we're looking at this as a requel. It's they're going through kind of some of those main beats as the first one, just in a different kind of fan sphere.
Yeah, it's almost surreal just how I guess parallel to real life they this storyline becomes,
Mm.
especially because they're openly referencing Halloween 2018 as well. And like that movie, it feels like just came out, and here we are. There's already like a Scream movie based on the framework of that movie. So it's kind of brilliant though, because the Stab movies have always been kind of like a running joke, but also somewhat integral to the plot of the Scream movies in the sequels. So the fact that it's actually the driving force behind this latest installment is kind of brilliant in a way. And it's funny because once again, just like Billy Loomis, it's the boyfriend in this one. And it's funny that Dewey just straight up says it's probably him, like when he first meets Jack Quaid's character. And you're like, well, there's no way they'll do that again, right? But here we are.
And then Rich even goes at the end, like, he said it right away. I can't believe you didn't, I can't believe you didn't listen.
Yeah, it's so I did like how they played at those expectations. And it's kind of at that point where you can look at all the Scream movies and you can see like how simple or complex the motives have been. Like you had Roman in Scream 3, where it was this very elaborate kind of rewriting the entire history, going back all the way to the beginning kind of thing. And then you have like Mickey, where it's just like, I want to blame it on the movies and be popular, and Mrs. Loomis, of course. But yeah, it was interesting that they just kind of kept it like, as simple as they did, but in a way it was very effective, because it was, for as much as I kept thinking like that Richie was involved, Jack played him as such like an aw shucks nice guy like throughout most of the movie, that I thought, well, maybe he's actually a nice guy. And then of course it turns out that he's anything but.
Yeah, and I think, this is a very meta movie, and I think they did a good job at casting it in a way where, horror fans probably think of Jack Quaid from his character in Tragedy Girls, where he plays, he's kind of very, I don't think milquetoast is the right word, but he's just kind of very vanilla, and he's very well meaning, but he's just kind of there. And he winds up, at the end of spoiler alert for Tragedy Girls, he winds up, he's a good guy, but he winds up being killed by kind of our anti-heroes. And if you haven't seen Tragedy Girls and I'm spoiling that, that's your fault. See the movie Tragedy Girls because it's amazing. But I think there's a little bit of playing with that kind of, aw shucks, good guy image that I think Jack Quaid is developing, and using that to hide, to kind of, give him some cover when the the answer is ultimately so obvious.
Yeah, and I love too how he says, "Oh, isn't it horrible?" He kind of admits, "I know it's horrible that it's me," like because he knows just how much, Sam was like, "Oh, I'm with a decent guy," and like he just seemed, he kind of was so self-aware of his own impact as like a person, and so the fact that it kind of made it even more deranged. And then on the other side, you had Amber, who, I guess I had my suspicions about her, but she really once the reveal happened, she really flipped the switch, and I thought she went into some like Stu territory with her antics, and
Yeah.
it definitely was reminiscent of like the Billy and Stu dynamic, and of course you're in like Stu's old house, so there's that, kind of like the requel approach. You're in the same, like it's literally happening in the same house that Sydney, squared off against Billy and Stu all those years ago. But I thought as a pairing, they made a really interesting kind of psychotic duo in that finale. But it was maybe it almost, in some ways, it almost seemed like you were expecting a bigger twist, but it also kind of makes sense based on the characters and what you know about them at that point.
Yeah, yeah, and I think they're very aware that in some ways this twist is a little bit of a letdown. Like I think when he's when he gives that line like I know, I'm bummed it's me too. Like I think that's winking to the audience saying like, yeah, we got you, and yeah, maybe this isn't as like grand of a reveal as you were hoping for, but it's in line with the original and kind of some of the things we're trying to say. Um, would there be another way to do that? Possibly. I don't know. Um, did it feel familiar, and did it maybe not ring as kind of fun and true as the way it comes about in the first movie? Not as much, but I think it's not anything that's gonna like ruin the movie because I think that there is enough entertainment up until that point and around that point, and the fact that there's a self-awareness to that reveal that I think it can be forgiven. Um, and I also think they leave enough dangling threads that when the inevitable next installments come out, because when you find out, like for example, again that Sam is Billy Loomis's daughter, they don't really explain how that happened. Like who's the mom? Unless there's dots there that maybe people are bigger fans of the franchise than I am that have already connected those dots. But for me, I think that's probably still a mystery they could dive into if they're going to look to take the franchise in new places for future installments.
Yeah, yeah, especially because the mom is kind of noticeably out of town for the entire movie,
Yeah.
and and I know she's kind of doing her own thing, but I do think that I would be surprised if we didn't see more of some of the parents, or like at least that mom character, just because she is so central to Sam and Tara's story. I'd be curious like who they cast in that role, and how involved will she be in a future installment. And then also, of course, I'm sure we'll get some more expectations subverted maybe with Sam, because now everyone's thinking, well, obviously she's going to be the killer, right? Because she has this dark past. But I don't think it'll be that simple. I think, even though she kind of utilized her connection with Billy Loomis to kind of save the day at the end of this movie, it doesn't necessarily mean she's going to become like the next Michael Myers, like at the end of
Yeah.
Halloween 4 or something like that. So I'll be curious. I expect them to continue toying with our emotions going forward with all of these characters.
Yeah, I think what I really liked about Sam and the way they resolved kind of her conflict with being Billy Loomis's daughter is that, for as familiar as the reveal felt, the way she kind of winds up doing Richie in really twists that whole end sequence on its head, where at the end of Scream One, you've got Sydney with the gun and kind of really making a name for herself as an all-time great final girl, whereas Sam is kind of unleashing her own Billy Loomis, but kind of in a way she's almost like Dextering it in a way that, like, I've got these impulses, and I've kind of got this, these things that scare me about myself, but I'm going to use it in a way that is going to protect me and my loved ones. And so, rather than it being something where, she shoots him, or, or something, that kind of gives a nod to Sydney, it's a nod to Billy, because she just slices him up with a knife, in a way that, like, it was a fist pump moment for me. Like, I liked the way they did that.
Yeah, they literally went for the jugular there, and it was. And I love right up until the end, Richie too. He was like saying, "What about my movie, though?" And
What about my ending? Yeah. And
yeah, what about my ending?
that line is so great. Here it comes, and then she just slices his throat. Like, it's
It's a very
that was
cathartic moment.
yes, yes. Um,
And they do not hold back with the violence in those moments. I mean, it really. I know it's probably a mix of practical and some CG in there, but man, they really like with the stabbings. They're very like fast, kind of brutal. Like, I mean, they really went for it with those scenes and kind of reminding you, like, yeah, this is a pretty a messed up moment in its own right, even though you're also putting a lot of comedy in there too.
yeah, yeah, and I think, that's where, for the areas where things felt a little too familiar, I think I forgive it, because they did such really good suspenseful set pieces. And we're able to tap into those scenes that Wes Craven did so well in part one, and also in part two. Um, and yeah, it's gory and it's brutal, but like they build tension really well. And I think one of the things that really fascinated me about this one was the way that they twisted your expectations in terms of where you could be attacked, when and where you could be attacked.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sequence where they're in a hospital, and at one point Ghostface attacks. This must be the same hospital as, like, Haddonfield Hospital in Halloween 2, where there's like maybe two people working there, because it is quiet as can be. So there's a little suspension of disbelief, but I do enjoy the fact that, like, they're subverting what you expect to be the beats of, like, when you're in danger and when you're not.
Yeah, there's really no safe moment. And then, of course, most of the movie, you can't really trust anybody either.
Mm-hmm.
And especially for the Carpenter sisters, like they just don't know if they can even trust each other.
Mm-hmm.
So that, and I love too that sister relationship, like the strange sister relationship between them, because it would have been easy for them to like immediately get along once they reunite, but it's anything but that. It's like there's a lot of baggage there that they're working through, and so it just adds this other element of tension to, like, maybe Sam is involved somehow, like, you like as a viewer you don't even really know, so it's kind of interesting how they always play with that. And then also too, like maybe the most heartbreaking kill happens in broad daylight, when you have the character of Wes played by Dylan Minnette, and
Mm-hmm.
then his mom played by Marley Shelton, where it's like you just don't, and then they play with your emotions too, where you think it'll happen in the shower, and then
Mm-hmm.
it ends up being even harder to watch because he's so close to being out of the house, and yet he doesn't open the door all the way,
Mm-hmm.
and then just dies right there. So it's amazing. Like Ghostface is just everywhere at any time in this movie. So they definitely, I think, up the ante on when you can get killed and how there's really no safe moment in a Scream movie.
Yeah, yeah, and that the Sheriff Hicks's death, I think, was the one that caught me by surprise the most, and I think was the one that did kind of that suspense misdirect the best, because they tee it up as, you're worried about her son Wes, because he's the one in the vulnerable position. He's the one who's, in the house. He's nude in the shower. He's the Marion Crane of this situation. And Sheriff Hicks is the one who is racing back to try and save the day. And just as she's getting to the house, out pops Ghostface in broad daylight and stabs her to death.
Oh my gosh.
Again, one of those things where it's like, part of you is wondering, like, would nobody be around at that point in the day? But it's possible.
Yeah,
it's is it improbable? Yes, but it's also not impossible. And so, to be able to take that scene where you have like what you're hoping is going to be the hero moment and just kind of blindside you with a death is really interesting. And then, it kind of lets your guard down because you think, well, okay, so she's the death in this one, so maybe Wes is going to be okay. And then no, he eats it too. It's an unforgiving movie.
It really is, yeah. And that's, it was like a double whammy where you're like, wait, there's no way they're gonna, kill the mom and the son, and then of course they do. And then on top of that, you have, as they refer to it, as like a legacy character like Dewey, getting killed, and of course, and that's all part of their requel framework of like, well, we had to kill a legacy character so that you knew, you had to take us seriously. And so that's what the fans, as lovable as Dewey and Gail and Sydney are, you still have a lot of fans that have been saying, well, they've been alive for so long, like at some point one of them has to die, just to like remind you that no one's safe in a Scream movie. Because I feel like not since Randy's death in Scream 2 had there been a death that was truly kind of dangerous or like unexpected, where you felt like an untouchable character was maybe killed. And I still haven't gotten over Randy's death, but I totally understand why they did it, because it was kind of the last time it really felt dangerous, like anything could happen to anybody. So I think they tapped into that really nicely with this, as difficult as it was to lose Dewey, especially in such a grisly fashion like that.
Yeah. I mean, it was, we had our big three, and I think one of the big questions that even, on one of our shows, we were talking about like, which one do we think is going to go? I think we might need to give credit to Scott, because if I remember correctly, I think he might have guessed Dewey was going to be the one to eat it. And indeed, like the Force Awakens, they bring in Han and then wind up killing the poor guy. Pretty brutally too, double knife. One to the like gets sliced up the middle from both the back and the front.
Very much like a butcher style kill.
Yeah. And they lean into it in terms of course, they make a meal out of the moment, really kind of make you sit in a little bit. And it's rough. And it's, again, like it's one of those situations where I think at this point they had to, like, one of the big three had to go, otherwise they were probably going to get grief for the fact that, like, but at the same time, like, I like the fact that there are characters who have been through this many movies who have been able to survive.
And how it's not just Sydney, like it's, like kind of like it's not just Laurie Strode, it's, these characters. And I guess, well, I guess I shouldn't say that, because Halloween Kills, we saw a whole cast of survivors come back to fight evil, but in this one it feels a little more like that core group of like they're going through it together, rather than just one person kind of wallowing in that grief, for years.
Yeah, and I think it was also good because of taking the Force Awakens approach rather than the what you get used to in slashers, where it's don't blink too quickly in the first act because they're going to go.
Right.
They gave all three of the legacy characters like meaty roles, and I think they focused more on Dewey. I'll be interested to see in future installments, are they going to start kind of backing off Sydney and Gale and focusing more on, or are they going to bring them back in? And again, are they going to prove that nobody's safe? Are they going to knock off another one in a future installment? Like, I'll be interested to see what direction they're going to go with that.
Yeah, it's really, I think that's the biggest question mark, even more than like who's the next killer, because I know there's a lot of people that just kind of want, Sydney and Gale to ride off into the sunset and not have to die horribly just for the character's arc to be over. But then on the other hand, it's like, well, would Sydney and Gail stand by if there was another Ghostface killing going on and not intervene somehow and try to help people? So I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see how they address that. And I think they're both open to coming back if if they like what's in the script and kind of how their characters are treated. So I don't really know if they would want to come back just to be killed off like in the opening scene and
Mm-hmm.
or something like that, even though it's kind of what is, it's definitely that horror trope where it's like, okay, you've been a survivor, now you're going to die so that you can pass the torch. Well, it's like the whole point of this movie was kind of showing you could pass the torch without dying yourself.
Mm-hmm.
As they showed with Amber's death, quite interestingly. So,
Yeah, I think I would more prefer to see Sydney and Gail get to kind of go further into the background, and maybe be like sources of information or something like that, rather
mhm.
than potential victims. Just because at this point, it has have there been any final girls that have lasted as long as Sydney or as Gail?
I mean, especially in the same timeline, right? Because you have like Jamie Lee Curtis has obviously been around in a lot of Halloween movies, but you're dealing with multiple timelines in that one.
Yep.
So yeah, it would be nice to involve them somehow, like you said, maybe have them be like help out from a like over the phone or something, or some type of recognition without actually like killing them off,
Mm-hmm.
which I feel like if they survive Scream 5, they kind of have the right to survive, and live the rest of their lives. But I know at the same time, it also doesn't really feel like a Scream movie without them. So I don't know, it's a really fine line to walk, but it would be interesting. I'm sure they'll, again, probably play with our expectations in the next movie if they are in it and maybe just have them live, even though if we think they might die in the opening scene or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it'll be curious though.
Well, and that's the thing where, again, if we're kind of going with the connection to kind of the Star Wars trajectory, part of what made where they were initially going was so interesting between Force Awakens and The Last Jedi was, The Force Awakens kind of was a good way to bring the old and the new together, and The Last Jedi was really kind of pushing more towards, okay, we're going to focus on these newer characters, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously you have Luke to some extent, but like he's more of a mentor. He's not in it too much. And it's not until Rise of Skywalker that everything just kind of reverts back to it's all part of like the old story. So to be able to, it would be better to kind of see them really zig where Star Wars zagged and really take the opportunity to just focus on these newer characters, and figure out a way to have Sydney and or Gale be more kind of mentor characters, maybe from a distance or something like that.
Yeah.
Now that being said, I also would kind of like to see Stu come back in some facet.
Wouldn't that be fun?
But
Oh
then
my
that would also
gosh.
be like, for as much as I complained about Palpatine coming back in Star Wars, and then it'd be like, yeah, go with Stu, bring him back for this one. I realize there's a bit of a disconnect there, but I don't know. I think it'd be interesting.
And I think it was Matthew Lillard who voiced Ghostface in like the Stab 8 clips
Oh,
in
really?
in the new Scream movies. So I love how they definitely are kind of, it's almost like their way of saying, see, he kind of is the killer in a in a
Yeah.
weird way. But yeah, of all the killers that have been shown throughout the Scream movies, he's like the one that didn't get shot in the head or like severely damaged enough where he somehow some way could come back just because a TV fell on his head. I mean,
You can
it's
bounce
like
back from
he's
that.
the one. Yeah, he's the one guy who could come back, and I feel like that would be the ultimate fan service. But and I know it's a little out there, even for Scream, but it would be kind of fun to see that.
Plus, in some way, I think it would make sense in terms of, and I forget if I don't think this is something I pulled from my own head. I think someone else brought this up, but I for the life of me can't remember who. Um, if it was something along the lines of kind of like Harry Connick Jr.'s character from Copycat, where he's this serial killer who's in prison, but he's kind of pulling the strings from prison.
Right. Yes. That
And
would be interesting.
we maybe learn a movie or two down the line that, like, for as coincidental as Richie and Amber thought their subreddit meeting was, like maybe he was kind of moving some pieces from prison or something like that.
If you're gonna like talk about like really taking it to another level, I think that would be kind of amazing if they did that. It almost would feel like fan fiction in some way, but at this point, it's kind of like they're dealing with that anyway. So it would be kind of right on cue with the direction that they're going. And they had so many homages and mentions of Stu in this movie, and I know it was actually Kyle Gallner, who plays what is apparently Stu's nephew in the movie, and he doesn't survive. So that's kind of an interesting direction to go there. But it would be interesting to see if somehow he was, still alive, and B, like involved, or like the mastermind, running this whole operation of like a ghost face army.
Plus, it would be like, if we're talking about horror fandom, we've talked about the slasher rules in the first one. A lot of these conversations have been about the slasher rules, and they've kind of incorporated slasher fandom into this. So, like, you talked about it being fan fiction. That would almost be a way of having that meta discussion about like fan fiction bleeding into like canon.
Yes.
Which,
Oh my gosh.
I think if done well, I think, could be an interesting take and an interesting direction to go.
And if they really want to mess with people, you reveal that Stu is alive. You have Sydney and Gail visit him in prison, and you put that all in the trailer and the marketing and this whole big reveal and this reunion, and then it just turns out that he's like, no, I'm not involved. How could I be? He's like, it sounds like you got a big mess on your hands. Good luck with that.
I have to go out for my weekly exercise. I only get 15 minutes, so please leave me alone. That'd be great. I think we just wrote it. I think we're good to go.
I think so. Yeah.
So final verdict or final thoughts on the new Scream 5.
Scream 5. Yes. We're not hiding it here, folks. And it's not called The Scream either. So that makes it a little easier. The more I talk about it, the more I like it. And I definitely enjoyed it when I first saw it as well. And it's just been kind of marinating since then. And I think it does a good job of reintroducing the franchise and not really showing all of its cards yet, leaving a lot of room open for the future. I think it's really cool how both Chad and Mindy survived, even though, Chad got kind of brutally stabbed. So you have both of the Meeks twins coming back. You have
that was a
Sam
nice moment. Like
it was, yeah.
Where like she's on her way out to the ambulance, and it's like, oh, Chad's okay. He's alive.
Right.
Yeah.
It was kind of the Dewey moment from the first Scream, where he was originally going to die, and then they threw that in there, and he lives. And then also kind of randomly in the, like, when they're watching the YouTube videos in the movie, there's like this little mention of Kirby from Scream 4 and like how she's still alive. So, I mean, who knows? We could see Hayden Panettiere come back, because I know a lot of people had wished that we'd gotten some closure with her character. But I think it has a lot of fun. It's very much a requel to every extent, and I think it sets things up nicely for the next installment. So I think it really checks all the boxes. I know there's been some, commentary online about, does it kind of give some unwarranted redemption for like Billy as a character because he's like helping, or like, does it show him as like a hero, even though he's still this like sadistic killer?
Now, see, I had some initial misgivings about that, but when you think about it, for me, like, we're not talking about, this is not a supernatural story. They're not taking it into like Michael Myers territory for the new Halloween stuff, where it's like, there are some clearly like, supernatural elements to what Michael Myers is. I think what Sam is seeing is her own kind of inner turmoil, and it manifests itself as, images of her father. And I
Hmm.
think coming to terms with that, and those, like, what you almost see is like kind of a tender final moment with kind of her and the reflection of her dad. It's not her coming to like terms with her dad, it's her coming to terms with herself. And
Yep.
so I think that for me that worked, and there was that initial kind of impulse to be like, well, that's kind of weird to try and bring Billy as kind of like a hero, but it's, when you think about it, it's not Billy, it's Sam.
Yeah. I think in the context of it, it's kind of it's definitely something you got to think about for a little bit, and it takes some getting used to in general. But it is kind of cool how they brought they brought Skeet back for that, and that he was like totally down to do that.
Hmm.
And I think it's something we'll see more of now, just with the technology that they have. Like, I'm curious how this might play out in other horror franchises if they want to kind of do that type of thing where they can use the CG and bring people back. So yeah, it'll be I'll be curious about that. And then also it was nice too that they had Roger L. Jackson back as Ghostface once again. I mean,
Hmm.
kind of the unsung hero of the or villain of the franchise, I guess you could say. But it is amazing that he's been able to, even though of course he's not on camera, just his voice has been just the spirit of this franchise through all these movies. I think is such a cool thing that they're able to continue that tradition, and hopefully for several more movies as well.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's, I agree. This is a requel for better or worse. I think mainly for the better. I think they hit a lot of the right notes, and like you said, they check a lot of the boxes. I think if there's anything that I would, um, quibbles about the movie, is that there is an element of checking boxes to this. They're making sure they get the formula as correct as possible. So if they're going to keep doing these, I would like to see the Radio Silence Gang maybe try and get a little bit bolder with where things
Hmm.
are going. But I think for, if they turn out not to make another one, I think this was kind of a nice coda to the whole thing, or a nice way to kind of cap everything off. Um, I think it works better though as an introduction to kind of a new path for this. And so if they take this as a starting point and take it into some new realms, then I think that's only going to make this one better, if they manage to stick the landing more with subsequent installments.
Yeah, and it does look like at this point, sequel has been greenlit with the same directors and this and with James Vanderbilt and Guy Busick back to write the screenplay. So one would assume too that Kevin Williamson will be back as executive producer. So it's really nice to have his continued involvement as well, just with Scream 5. But yeah, I'm hoping they'll let their hair down a little bit more too. And I know a lot of people know them from Ready or Not, so I think
Hmm.
people really want.
We know what happens when they let their hair down, and it's a lot of
Right,
fun. Yeah.
exactly. So I think the future is bright though, and it's definitely a good time to be a Scream fan
Yeah,
and a Stab
absolutely.
fan.
Absolutely. Because now, yeah, who knows where that franchise is going to go now that they have all these new killings to work with.
Right.
All right. Well, I think that's going to bring us to the end of the episode. We want to thank, as always, Brian, our engineer, for helping us out each and every episode, making us sound good, because we certainly make that a difficult job. As always, we also want to thank you, our listeners, including those who have signed up for a Corpse Club membership. Make sure to visit corpseclub.com to check out our latest episodes. You can also become a member, which will give you access to all kinds of different goodies, membership cards, T-shirts, and you can help us pick out some podcast episodes for future installments. And I feel like we keep having to remind people, like, that is, if you're a member, please tell us what you want us to talk about, because that's less time that we have to put into planning. So we would absolutely love to do an episode based off of input from one of our members. So please email us. And if you don't know how to email us, then you can get to us at contact@corpseclub.com. You can also reach out via Twitter at Daily Dead News or at Corpse Club, and on Instagram and Facebook under Corpse Club. So I think with that, thanks again for listening. And until next time, stay scary.